entitled Managing the Mental Health of All During These Challenging Times. Let's just get my slides so they can work. We're going to hopefully achieve 4 key objectives today. We're going to look at ways to improve our own mental health and resilience to cope with these exceptionally challenging times, both at work and at home. We're going to look at the best ways to stay emotionally connected with your teams. Now, a lot of them are working remotely, and how to keep people engaged as we go back out of lockdown as well. We're going to give you hints and tips to help you have a productive day when you're working from home. And we're going to give you specific advice how to protect your mental health during this pandemic, which I think we can all see now is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, sadly. Now, I'm aware some of you know me, some of you don't. So just a few bits about me personally. I'm engaged to the lovely Lisa. I'm one of those people who should have been getting married in April, but sadly, like lots of weddings, we've had to put that off to next year. We've got 3 grown-up kids between us, Joel, Jodie, and Casey. I recently became a granddad to Noah, but like lots of people, because of lockdown, I haven't seen too much of him so far, but hopefully that will improve in the future. And I live in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire. I'm also someone who's had COVID-19. I count myself very lucky, because I was poorly for about 3 weeks at the end of March, beginning of April. And I had that very high fever. I never got that real shortness of breath. So luckily for me, I never got near to being hospitalized. So I count myself very lucky indeed. And then for those of you who don't know me, a little bit about my background and what's brought me here today. I spent over 36 years in media, very normal career, not as a journalist, but working on the commercial side of newspapers like the Evening Telegraph in Northamptonshire, the MD, and Auto Trader, where I was one of their commercial directors for 13 years. It was a very normal career, but I was hiding a very dark secret. And that dark secret was that I was battling with my mental health throughout that entire time in complete silence. Even I didn't realize that nobody in my world had a clue about my mental health, not my ex-wife of 28 years, not my mates down the pub, and certainly nobody I work with. But my whole life changed forever on the 16th of May, 2016, when I outed myself about my mental health. And it's changed my life, and it really has changed it for the better. When I first started telling my story, it resonated with more people and at a deeper level than anything I've ever done in my life before. But I was getting too many people coming up to me saying, David, although you've been really honest about your mental health story, and I've realized today I'm normal, I could never share with my employer my true mental health because I think it would have a negative impact on my career. And more people came to me saying they couldn't trust their employer with their mental health, so they suffered in silence. So I realized a few years ago that where my energies needed to focus was on helping organizations to create kinder cultures of trust in the workplace. And that's what's brought me here today. I've been very lucky in the last 3 years to work with many of the leading brands around the UK, helping them with their culture. And obviously that's become even more important during this pandemic. And I've been very, very lucky in recent weeks to be working with the likes of Network Rail, with the Royal Navy, with the Law Society, the John Lewis Partnership, and many others. And can't believe I'm doing this work, and it really is a privilege. And as I say, what I really try and do is not train up people on mental health. I try and train organizations to create cultures in the workplace where people can be really honest about their mental health. I still suffer with panic attacks to this day. I may come across like I'm quite confident and find this quite easy, but trust me, even before this talk just now, I had a real wobble. And I thought to myself, what if I have a panic attack this afternoon delivering this webinar for Optamor? And they never ever go away. When someone first asked me, how do you get through these talks without having one? I didn't really know the answer. I remember saying there's a phrase we associate with poor mental health, that it's okay not to be okay. And perhaps I've truly embraced that. But I knew it wasn't the truth. And then as time went along, and I started to realize as well that you inspire people when you share vulnerability. Traditionally, it's been regarded, certainly in the UK, that if you admit to having poor mental health, then it's a weakness. But trust me, you inspire people around you when you share vulnerability. And during a pandemic like this, it's even more important that we all share how we're really feeling, because we're giving other people permission to also share how they're feeling too. So I knew what was helping me get through these sessions was that line, I inspire people when I share vulnerability, but I still knew it wasn't the answer. I'll never be cured, and cure's a strange word to use, because I really hope that one day I'd find the way to get rid of them altogether. I've realized that the reason I don't have a panic attack is these days I allow myself to have one. I say to myself, show you on camera this afternoon what my face looks like while I'm having a panic attack. Try and talk you through, although I'm becoming breathless, what it feels like to be having one. By allowing myself to have one, I'm being really kind to myself. I'm showing myself compassion. So I believe the reason that I now get away without panic attacks, I've discovered what they call self-compassion, which is all about being kind to yourself. I'm going to talk to you a lot today about the value of kindness and to both yourself and to people around you, again, particularly during a crisis like COVID-19. I've been asked repeatedly in recent weeks, how many of us are going to suffer with some degree of poor mental health during COVID-19? And without doubt, it's absolutely every single one of us. Let's forget statistics like 1 in 4. It really is 1 in 1. Every single one of you has health, both physical and mental. And on some days, your physical health could be better, and some days your mental health could be better. During this crisis, some of you are going to have days when your energy levels are quite low. Some of you are going to have disturbed night's sleep, more so than you would do normally. Either you're waking up 2 or 3 times a night, or you're waking up early in the morning, can't get back to sleep. And certainly a lot of you on some days, and maybe today, you're struggling with your ability to concentrate because you've got a lot going on in your head. It may be that you're worried about a partner who's been furloughed. It may be that you're worried about elderly parents who are being shielded. It may be that you're worried about, do you send your kids back to school or not? It may be you're worried about your finances. It may be you're worried about your health, and it may be you're worried about the viability of the company you're working for. And because you've got a lot going on in your head, you're struggling to concentrate. Well, everything I've just talked about there is not great mental health. We've got this perception that we've only got poor mental health if we're diagnosed with depression, or diagnosed with anxiety, or diagnosed with schizophrenia. You don't have to be diagnosed with poor mental health to have poor mental health. We all have health, as I said earlier, both physical and mental. And all mental health is the health of your mind. Part of the problem is we don't like that word mental. We don't like to associate with it. I'll give you an example. If you typed into Google Images mental health, you'd see a picture of someone like me with their head in their hands looking really sad. Yet if you typed into Google Images physical health, you'd see a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger or Usain Bolt or Cristiano Ronaldo. I get so frustrated that the imagery of physical health is so positive, and yet the imagery of mental health is so negative. Why? You know, some people don't have great physical health, but they have brilliant minds. So again, in there lies part of the reason why no one wants to associate with mental health. The reason I talk so passionately about 1 in 1, during this pandemic, it's really important we can encourage everybody to open up and really share how they're feeling. And if we talk 1 in 4, we continue to stigmatize people. When we talk 1 in 1, we try and make this subject just more normal and hopefully make it easier for everyone to talk about. I'd like you to go into the chat function again now, if you wouldn't mind, and just give me a score out of 10 for how you're feeling today. I'm not going to come back to any of you individually and get you to talk through your score. I'm just interested to see the range of scores from 1 to 10 of how you're feeling this afternoon. And I'll come back to that later on. But again, I promise I won't come back to any of you individually with why you've scored what you've scored. But when I count down from 3, if you wouldn't mind putting a score in. Oh, brilliant. 3, 2, 1. I've got a lot of 7s there, all 7s. Okay, Lindsay, what? We've got Lindsay 9. Thank you, everyone. I can see it. Oh, we've got someone who's 12 out of 10. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. I can see we've got scores that certainly range from 5 to 12 and during this session, probably about twice a day at the moment, I've had every score from 1 to 100. So even though I asked from 1 to 10. So thank you very much for doing that this afternoon. So what does the training program look like to become mentally fitter? And how do we build our own resilience? I'm very lucky that in recent years, I've been running workshops, and the most popular breakout group is where we ask people to put together a training program to become mentally fitter. So I'm going to share with you this afternoon the insight that that's given me working with many different organizations in recent years. Now, there's nothing on that list that's going to surprise you, but it's actually a really good list to go through to remind ourselves what you should all be doing at the moment to look after your mental well-being. The first thing I'm going to talk to you about today is sleep. Sleep is really, really important to your mental health. You've all been to bed late at night, really tired, worried about something, had a good night's sleep, woken up the next day and thought, why was I worried about that? Well, you were worried about it because you were tired. When you're tired and you're not sleeping, everything seems heavier and darker and gloomier. When you're getting good sleep, it really helps with your energy levels, and it enables you to, be more ready to take on the world. I know we're all different, and some of you need more sleep than others. And equally, I know some of you would desperately love more sleep, but you're struggling with your sleep at the moment. But if you can, try and regulate your sleep. Try and roughly go to bed at the same time each night, and try and roughly get up at the same time each day. And you will find that helps. And try not to stay up too late at night. If you can, get to bed earlier and get some sleep. It's really important. Second thing I want to talk to you about is physical health. I'm asked more and more these days about the relationship between mental health and physical health, and they are so closely aligned. It's not surprising that governments around the world have allowed us out for physical exercise during these lockdown periods, because it's been recognized the link between your mental health and your physical health. Now, to some of you watching this afternoon, physical health to you will be a Joe Wicks workout in the morning, or it'll be a 5K run every lunchtime. To some of us, it's just a walk around the streets where we live, or it's a walk around a nice country park. But every single one of you should be getting some form of physical exercise at the moment. And ideally, where you can, you should be getting it every day. And please don't underestimate the importance of that. I then want to talk to you about me time. The most important person in the world to love is not your mother, it's your kids, it's not your partner, it's you. Because the more you love yourself, the more you can love people around you. You've all been on an airplane where they say if you put your oxygen, if the oxygen masks come down, you put yours on first, even if you've got kids with you. Because if you don't give yourself priority and look after yourself, you might not be well enough to look after the people around you. Well, it's never been so important as it is at the moment to put your own mask on first every day. It's not being selfish to love yourself. It's actually a very generous thing to do, because you're putting yourself in a position where you can support those people in your life. I'll tell you a quick story of a guy I was working with a few years ago who underestimated the value of me time. He was someone who was finding his career very easy. He had a reputation at work that nothing really stressed him. Nothing really gave him any sort of angst or anything like that at all. But when I met him 3 years ago, he felt he was failing for the first time in his life. And what he felt he was failing at was being a dad. He'd become a very miserable dad and a very miserable partner to his wife. And I found out that when he first became a dad, because he was a very busy man, he gave up 3 things to create more time for mum and baby. He gave up his Arsenal season ticket, he gave up running, and he gave up car rallying. And we reckon within a few months, he developed postnatal depression. So we got him back to going to football again. We got him running again. We got him car rallying again. And within a few months, he was in a much better place. A few years on, he's now got a couple of kids, and he's a very happy dad. And he's generally in a much better place because he absolutely knows, however busy he is in his life, looking after people at work, people at home, he finds time to do things for himself because he recognizes the value of me time. The next thing I want to talk to you about comes from a child. Sometimes children can see things with great clarity that us adults can miss. And this is a true story. In a school in the UK last year, a child said to his teacher, teacher, why don't teachers have playtime like children do? And the teacher didn't really know the answer. And he just smiled. But luckily later that day, the teacher said to the head teacher, one of the kids has got a great idea. Why don't the teachers have playtime too? And the teacher said, what a brilliant idea. So a few weeks later in that school, they had a role reversal. The teachers were told without exception, you're going out into the playground and you're going to have playtime. And the kids were told without exception, you're not having playtime. You're going to stay in the classroom. Now, you know what kids are like. They look forward more to that playtime than any other playtime they'd had in that entire school year, even though they weren't getting playtime. But this story has quite a sad ending because the kids were left quite disappointed. They rushed to the windows of the classrooms to get the best vantage points to look out onto the playground. And what they wanted to see was the teachers running around the playground, chasing each other, having a really good laugh. But what they saw was all these guys and girls standing there, these adults, looking really bored, not running around chasing each other, not laughing, not having any fun, and dare I say it, a few of them on their mobile phones. The reason I tell this story is that we give kids playtime for 4 different distinct reasons. One is it re-energizes them between 2 pieces of work. Secondly, it's social interaction. Thirdly, it's fresh air and sunshine, ideally. And lastly, it's physical exercise again. Now, when we become adults, we need playtime as much as when we were kids. And I'm going to suggest that a number of you watching this webinar this afternoon are not getting enough playtime in your life. You're not re-energizing yourself between different pieces of work. You're not getting enough social interaction on some days. You're not getting enough fresh air and sunshine. And you know, some of you not getting enough physical exercise. So I encourage all of you to think about the concept of playtime when you're structuring your days, particularly when you're working from home. Try and contact people in your life who make you laugh, who make you smile. Sometimes in your life, you've got to reduce the time you spend with people who drain you of energy. Give yourself treats, give yourself things to look forward to. While I'm just finishing this, by the way, can I ask you all to go back into the chat function again and just share with the group what you've been doing during lockdown to look after your own well-being. It may be things you've been doing with the family, but if you can just start typing in the chat function for me, things that you've been doing during lockdown to look after your own well-being, that would really be appreciated. So just my list here, healthy diet as always is important. And be honest with yourself. Too often we're in denial about how we're feeling. Too often, you know, we think we're doing better than what we are. I said to you earlier on, without doubt, this pandemic is a marathon, not a sprint. Any of you familiar with marathon running? I'm not saying you run marathons, but you will have heard about the wall. And you can be running a really good marathon. You could be 16 miles in and feeling really fit and healthy, and all of a sudden hit a wall because it's tough to run a marathon. And please, 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 all of you, keep looking after yourself during this pandemic because we are in a marathon, not a sprint. And you might think you're doing great at the moment, but if you're not careful, you might hit the wall. Right, people have started typing things in the chat function. Thank you very much. I see that Anne has been painting and gardening. Jill's been doing Zoom quizzes with the wider family. Yeah, we've done some of that. Pip's been walking, quizzes, keeping in touch with family and friends. Karen's making sure she goes for a walk every day. Amelia's treating herself with having daily smoothies. Get you, Amelia. Sarah's doing purposeless walking, like it. Natalie, online escape rooms. Yeah, my daughter's done that. Thought it was fabulous. And Lego. Jane's been doing daily run with the dogs, mountain biking, joining workouts online and walking, eating healthy and drinking lots of water. Very healthy, Jane. H. Stewart's been running, not new, indoor cycling, hired a bike to have at home. Well done, you. And someone's been doing virtual YouTube workouts with friends. Some really good stuff on there, everybody. I want you all to promise yourself something today. So many of us have rediscovered things that we really enjoy doing that we haven't done for a long time during this pandemic. Promise yourself that when we get to the other side, that you're going to carry on doing these sort of things, because there's so much value in maintaining this the other side of the pandemic. And my fear is we're going to go back to not doing all this stuff that's really making ourselves feel really good about things. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm rounding up my session now about what we need to do to look after our own mental well-being during this pandemic. Every session every webinar I'm running, every session I'm doing, I am focusing on you first, because you are the most important person to look after. Whether you're a CEO or whatever role you have in a business, and talking to you as a mother, as a father, as a friend, it's really important that you put yourself first at the moment, to look after people around you and really stay focused on your own well-being. But thanks everybody for what you shared there as well. That's fabulous. So how do you spot signs that a family member, friend or work colleague may be suffering with poor mental health? Again, I'm asked that very regularly at the moment. And when I run workshops and we have a breakout session on this subject, you won't be surprised to know that you can have 30, 40, 50 different things that you could look for. And it can be becoming quite overwhelming. Well, hopefully today I'm going to simplify it for you, because what you're looking for is just any change in their normal behavior whatsoever could be a sign. So don't worry that there's an endless list of what you might look for in terms of hygiene, in terms of social, completely cutting off socially, in terms of becoming short-tempered. You are looking for any change in behavior whatsoever. Now that's the easy bit. The tough bit is, how do you start a conversation with someone about their well-being without them feeling awkward or without you feeling embarrassed? Now, I believe the stigma of mental health is the whole wall of silence around the subject. And I think this is the most difficult bit of all, because we don't like to embarrass somebody. We just don't know how to start that conversation. So we end up saying nothing. And I'd rather we said something and got it a bit wrong than say nothing at all. Now, as a trained mental health counsellor, we are trained to notice, not interpret. When you try and interpret someone's behavior, that's when you can become guilty of judging, because obviously you're giving your own interpretation on why you think they're behaving like they are. But if you notice something, it's factual. So if I noticed that my friend Natalie was always normally really mild-mannered and easygoing, but suddenly she was biting my head off every day, it is okay for me to say to Natalie, Natalie, I've noticed recently you've become very short-tempered. Are you okay? Because it's factual. Natalie knows that I've seen that. It's more difficult for her to deny it. Don't get me wrong, she still may deny it. But there's more chance of her talking to me about why she's behaving like that, because I have called out and noticed a change in behavior. What I will say as well, before I move on from this slide, if anybody in your life, either a friend, colleague, anyone does anything drastic with their mental health, and you didn't notice the signs, don't ever give yourself a hard time. Because when people really want to hide poor mental health, trust me, they can do. So please don't ever give yourself a hard time. But do become braver moving forward. And if you spot signs that someone's changed their behavior, be prepared to call it out and ask if someone's okay. I'll say again that I think the stigma of mental health is the whole wall of silence around the subject. I think we struggle to talk about it. I don't think the stigma of mental health is a workplace stigma. I think it's so deep rooted in society, we bring it into work. I'll give you one more example, which will hopefully just summarize this part of my talk for you. My best friend, Steve, came up to me in mid-January of last year, and he said, David, I'm worried about Paul. And I said, what are you worried about? And he said, well, basically, Paul was disappearing after mealtimes at Christmas, and he's regularly disappeared after mealtimes ever since Christmas. And when he was a teenager, he went through a phase of pretending to eat. So there's history to do with Paul's eating and his mental health. And he said to me and his Paul's mum, Nikki, we're hardly sleeping. We just don't know what to do. Please, can you put your counsellor's hat on and give us some advice? And I said, yeah, of course I can do that. I said, this is what you do. You sit Paul down and you say to Paul, me and your mum really love you. We noticed at Christmas time you were disappearing after meal times. Are you okay? And Steve looked at me and said, do you mean I talked to him? And I said, yeah. I said, if he was walking around the house with a limp, you'd say straight away, if you got a bad leg. If he was walking around the house holding his belly, you'd say straight away if you've got a stomach ache. But because it's mental health, you can't even talk to your own son. And I remember Steve put his head in his hands and he said to me, "Why did it take you to tell me that?" And I said, "Because that's what we all do. We struggle to talk about mental health." I said, "Steve, it's already a month since Christmas. Please go and talk to your son today. Tell him you love him and ask him if he's okay." But that's what we all do. We struggle to talk about this subject. But again, during this pandemic, we've got the best excuse we've ever got to really start calling out people's changes in behavior, sharing our own vulnerabilities and talking more about this subject, and we'll go a long way to eradicating that stigma of mental health. So moving on to a completely new section of my talk this afternoon about how do we keep remote workers engaged and energized during a pandemic like this. Now, I've been lucky to be working, as I said, with many, many different organizations over the last couple of months. And I very much observe what I think is best practice and what I think isn't working at all. So I'm happy to share that insight with you this afternoon. The number one, without a doubt, is employees must feel at the moment that their well-being is priority over business performance. It's evidence-based that during a crisis, that companies who put the well-being of their staff first will come out the other side a lot stronger and are far more likely to survive tough times. Now, I know that's very difficult to expect from some very task-focused leaders, but what you've got to do is give priority to employee well-being over business performance. But trust me, it works. I was talking to the CEO of a very successful business last week, and he's very commercial. He's very, very sales driven. But he said, he actually put it on LinkedIn. He put a video out to his staff saying, "At the moment, I don't care about sales. I care about you. I care about my people. At the moment," he said, "don't worry about selling, worry about looking after yourself. And let's all get through this together." Now, I know him well. He massively cares about sales and the performance of his business. He's very authentic at the same time and cares about his people. But he knew by saying that sales would go up the following day. And they did. Because when you give priority to well-being over business, what appear to be the business priorities and business needs, you get far greater engagement from your people. I was chatting to one guy recently, and he said that he would be prepared to work for his employer at the moment on massively reduced pay for the next 3 months, just to protect the viability of the business, because his boss had inspired him so much. And I said to him, "So what's your boss doing to inspire you that much that you'd work for very little pay?" And he said to me, quite simply, whenever he talks to me, his priority is my well-being and the well-being of my family. He said, "Yes, we go on to talk about work, but initially priority is all about me." I also got sent an email recently by someone who wasn't in a good place with the company they were working for. And they showed me this email, and this is how you don't do it. The email was all about the needs of the business, with no empathy whatsoever with what their employees are going through. The whole email smacked of distrust. There was even reference to the fact that we've got technology that can check how much you're working at the moment. And the whole thing was like, whoever wrote that email was worried that now people are working remotely, they're all going to just do no work for that employer. Well, that email was more likely to ensure that they wouldn't want to work for that employer, because there was nothing about their well-being and what they must be going through at the moment. So this number one, giving priority to well-being, is really key. Closely linked to that, your managers must understand the value of kindness to both employees and the business as well. This was one of my key messages pre this pandemic, but it's just as important now, because you could work for a great organization with a great culture, but if your manager doesn't get it, then you won't get that experience either. And managers need training on this. Some of you will have heard me before give you some insight that I'm allowed to give you from HSBC Bank. They're considered one of the best employers in the world. And a few years ago now, they commissioned the biggest ever wellbeing survey ever undertaken. And they asked 76,000 people a lot of questions, but one of the questions was very black and white. It simply said, are HSBC interested in your well-being, yes or no? Mortified because 38,000 employees, 50% of the people in this survey said, no, this company doesn't care about me. Now, they drilled into the data with great urgency because they were mortified, and they were looking for a common denominator. And it won't surprise you that the common denominator was your line manager. And then they drilled further into the data to see what you're doing or not doing to make you think this company doesn't care about you. And it was really basic stuff. Like in your one-to-one meeting, those managers were going straight in to talk about KPIs and sales and objectives and strategy, as opposed to saying, look, before we talk about work, how are you? And how's the family? And not just asking that question, really listen. Now, that survey was about 3 years ago. So imagine how even more important it is now for managers to start conversations with how are you and really listen before they start talking about work. Again, I've mentioned this already today, but it's never been so important for senior people particularly to share their vulnerabilities to inspire their workforce. It is no longer a weakness to admit you're not having a good day, you're not in a good place. It shows real courage for managers to talk openly about their mental health. I am yet to see in the last few years any senior person regret sharing their own vulnerabilities. Again, it's evidence-based that senior people are more likely to lose their job if they don't show weakness. When you show your human side, you are far more likely to keep the dressing room with you and inspire people around you. I know I'm still working with many organizations where many senior people really struggle with this, but the world is changing. And again, I can't emphasize enough that value of being kind to yourself first at the moment, more than anything else, to maintain your resilience. So just summarizing some of this in some key tips for any managers here today, or for your managers in your businesses. Ask employees how they are and listen non-judgmentally before talking about work in almost every communication. There is always time to say to somebody, look, before we talk about work, how are you? And really listen. Ensure the tone of any communication is empathic and displays trust. If you get the tone wrong, you will lose the engagement of your people. A manager said to me the other day on a webinar, David, if I contacted my team every day, they think I was checking up on them. And I said, not if you get the tone right. People want to hear more from their boss at the moment than they would do previously. But as long as you get the tone right, you are allowed to contact people on a regular basis, just to check in with them, but start those conversations about well-being, not about work. Think about the language you use. I talk a lot about we've got to get better at talking about mental health. The worst thing I could say to any of you is, or anybody, is I'm worried about your mental health. People go into sort of shutdown mode. People, it's too invasive. Now, earlier on, I got you all to give me a score out of 10 today. That language of 1 to 10 really works well in this well-being space, because and what you're doing is, ideally you should do this on a consistent basis. So and you'll tend to find most people give you the same score every time. Most people are either generally an 8 or a 7 during normal times. So if I regularly did this and Natalie was always an 8, and one day suddenly Natalie was a 6, I wouldn't say anything in a team environment, but I'd say to Natalie later that day, I noticed this morning that you were only a 6 and you're always an 8. Do you mind me asking what's dragged you down to a 6? And people are more likely to tell you when you use numbers than if you try and drill into someone about their mental well-being. It can work on a one-off basis, but sometimes someone might suddenly give a 3 out of 10. And it may be that they've been up all night because one of the kids is ill or the dog's ill. But if you do it on a consistent basis, it enables you to see how scores can change, and it gives you an opportunity to open up a well-being conversation. I used to work with a guy, he was always a 10 out of 10. Now, no one is normally a 10 out of 10 the whole time, but he was always a 10. And one day in a meeting, he said he was 9. And I remember thinking, something's not right, because he's always a 10. And do you know what? He left about 2 weeks later because he had some challenges going on in his life. So someone's 10 is someone else's 8, is someone else's 6. As I say, what you're looking for is change. And try and speak to people every day at the moment. And remember, not all conversations have to be about work. A very well-known Japanese CEO, he was asked a few years ago, what's the best advice you can give people about how you run a hugely profitable, successful, highly engaged business? And he said, I've got 8 direct reports. I try and speak to them all every other day, but only half of those conversations might be about work. And a lot of people that day felt very disappointed by his answer, but a lot of other people thought that is absolutely brilliant. This guy completely gets that it is all about engagement and that you're still doing a great job for your business, but you don't always have to talk about work to keep people engaged. It shows you care about them as a human being. Here's a suggested process for managers when having a mental health conversation. This is when somebody is brave enough to share with you that they're not in a good place. This is just a very simple framework that can work really well, because a lot of managers think that they've got to be qualified in mental health or have some training on it. And it took me 5 years to qualify as a counsellor. And I hope that this framework will help some managers realize we do tend to overthink and overcomplicate a mental health conversation. If anyone ever comes up to you and says, you know, David, I'm in a really bad place. I've never spoken about this before. The first thing you do is thank someone for sharing, because that's going to put them at ease straight away. It really, really is difficult at first time someone might admit to you that they're struggling with their mental health. So the best thing you can do is to thank them for sharing, and again, listen without judging. Show support, and ideally you check whether work is a factor. If in that first conversation it sounds like you're trying to protect the company's backside, then don't even mention work in that first one. But ideally you are trying to find out if work is a factor. But the most important thing is you show support. The third one is about advising them to speak to a health professional. Now, I think most of us are aware the employee assistance programs are still massively underused. I think statistics still show that about 3% of employees ever use them. And this is where some managers, they think they've got to sit there with someone and try and fix them and offer them advice. You don't at all. The role of a manager is to create a relationship in the first place where people trust you. And when they trust you and they share with you how they're feeling, you straight away suggest them contacting a mental health professional. Some managers are very, very good with people, and they sit there for hours listening to someone's problems. That's not their job either. Your job is to say to someone fairly early on, look, I'm not qualified to deal with this, but what I want to do is to make sure that you're speaking to someone who can help you. What you then do, you thank them again. But it's really important you agree when you'll next check in with each other. Too many mental health conversations in the workplace are one-off, and the manager's too nervous to go back and ask again because they feel like they're prying and they don't want to get involved. But your role as a manager is to start a process of continual dialogue, probably just like you would with physical health. So again, you start a process by creating a relationship of trust. You then signpost professional help, but then you say, look, I really care about you. You know, it's my duty of care to make sure that you get the right sort of help. And in fact, I'm not going to stop checking in with you until I know you're in a much better place. And just finally, I do advise that people take notes, very, very minimal notes with any conversations about mental health. You always date them so you know when they happened. And sometimes you have to disclose. You've got a duty of care to both that person and yourself to protect them and to protect you. Here's some general hints and tips when working from home. Leave the house, even if it's standing going into the garden. You get energy when you get some fresh air and you get outside the house. So when you're working from home, every day at some stage, get outside that house, even if it's standing on your doorstep. Equally, move around the house. A lot of us, we don't live in mansions, do we? And when we're working from home, we've generally got one place we work from home at, and we end up sitting there all day. So get up and move around. Take your laptop and sit on the sofa for a while. Take it into the kitchen area, make yourself a coffee. I know sometimes you've got to negotiate with other members of the family because it doesn't always work because you've got to have consideration for others. But do try and move around your own house too. Put some boundaries around your work. Sometimes when you're at home, you blur the boundaries between work and home. know what time your day starts, know when you're going to have breaks, and know certainly what time you're going to shut your laptop down. Equally, stay focused and switch off distractions. I've got two gorgeous cats. If I don't have the door shut, they come in quite regularly and trouble me, and I love them to bits, so I get very distracted very easily. So I've had to be very strong and shut that door. Maintain social interaction. Don't underestimate how often, if you were working in an office or somewhere where you saw people regularly, all those little chats you would have that would give you energy and keep your day running. So maintain social interaction. And remember that all of you are unique human beings. So know what you need to do to have a good day. Nobody knows you like you. So really, really look after yourself. And just general suggestions to protect you during the coronavirus itself. Limit the time you spend watching things that aren't making you feel good. I think a lot of us at the beginning of this pandemic, we had the news on all day, every day, because it was interesting at first, but then we realized after a while it was dragging us down. Try and perhaps watch, the news once a day. I think I try and look at it in the evenings these days, but even then, some days not even watching it at all now. And am I missing it? No, because people tell me what's going on anyway. There's lots of places out there where there's so many different places to get information, and not all of it is trusted. So try and stay informed by sticking to trusted source of information. A lot of us these days are on Twitter, or in WhatsApp groups, or in Facebook. I'll be honest with you now, I've changed my status with more friends on Facebook in the last month than I did in the last 10 years, because I don't want to read certain people's posts. They drag me down. It's all too much. I'm not so active in WhatsApp groups because there's too many people sending through videos trying to make me laugh, and some of them aren't very funny, and I've just got too much else going on. So again, it comes back to really protecting yourself at the moment. Again, stay connected with people and be really careful to avoid burnout. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and too many people aren't taking holiday at the moment because you can't have a proper holiday. You've still got to have downtime. You've still got to look after your energy levels and protect your well-being at the moment. And generally exercise, eat well, and stay hydrated. It's very important that you talk to somebody at the moment if you're not in a great place. Again, most businesses have an employee assistance program. This is the time to use them. This is the time to make sure employees really are aware of the support that's available out there. But equally, again, just don't suffer in silence. If you can talk to your manager, talk to your manager, or a member of HR, or a mental health first aider, or just a colleague, but talk to somebody. But equally remember your doctors, mental health counsellors, family members and friends, but don't do what I did for many years, which was to suffer in silence. Equally, don't complicate this subject too much. It is a little more conversation. It's checking in with people at the start of calls as to how they are, but doing it authentically, really listening and showing that you really, really care about them. Because the key to get through this pandemic for most businesses is about employee engagement and keeping people emotionally engaged. Now, coming out of this pandemic is going to cause greater mental anguish than going into it in terms of the lockdown. When you look back now, going into lockdown was relatively straightforward because we were going to the safety of our homes, often to spend time with families. Again, I know it's different for different people, and some people have been in lockdown completely on their own, or perhaps with people you don't want to be with. However, coming out of lockdown is going to be a lot more challenging for people, and employers are going to have to be more empathic, more flexible than you've ever been before. Some people, as we know, just look at schooling. Some parents are adamant they want their kids back at school, and some parents are adamant their kids aren't at school. Some people at the moment will get on a train or a bus, and some people just can't. So we have got to be really, really understanding and flexible with our people, and really try and work with them to try and keep that engagement there, and to get back to some sort of normality, whatever normality looks like. I'm coming to the end of the formal part of my talk today. I really want to make sure that we've got some time for some general Q&A. And I think we've got between 10 and 15 minutes. So please use the chat function. Ellie, I'm not sure if people can come off mute. Can they come off mute to ask questions as well? It might be easier.
Absolutely. As long as they feel
so,
comfortable. Yeah, no problem at all.
If you'd either like to, if you've got any questions at all, and it's really good sometimes to debate these on these sessions, because I don't have all the answers. I'm a mental health professional. I spent many years managing people, and but I don't have the answers because we're going through a unique time. But what I am getting is insight by working with lots of different businesses at the moment and seeing what they're doing and what they're not doing in terms of trying to get through this pandemic for both their people and for their own business sakes. So has anyone got any questions that they'd like to pose either in the chat function or by coming off of mute? I'll share while you might be thinking of any questions, two things. Firstly, my next slide, let's just go to it in fact. My details are here, and if anyone wants to contact me about anything whatsoever to do with mental health, I promise you I'll always get back to you. So my email address is there if anyone wants to contact me outside of this, this webinar. Let me just take a drink of water because I'm just I've got a frog in my throat. How best to deal with anxiety going back to work. Again, with anxiety, the best thing is to try and make sure you've got a culture where people are going to be honest with you. The best way we can do that is on a consistent basis to regularly ask people how they are and really listen and really sort of just make sure that they really trust you in terms of your authenticity around that. And at the same time, by managers and senior leaders sharing their anxieties too, because the more we talk about it, the more we'll make it easier for everyone else to share how they're really feeling, and we can all help get through this together. Some senior leaders panic that when someone like me turns up, that by creating a kinder, softer culture, that more people will take mental health sick days. Trust me, the kinder your culture, people are more likely to try and come back into the office, go back to work, get on trains. The tougher the stance by the business, the more you try the tell route, the less likely you are to keep people on side. There's no magic wand to this scenario at all. And without knowing individual scenarios, I certainly can't always give specific advice for particular people. But generally with anxiety, once people start sharing honestly how they're feeling, anxiety levels tend to come down. And they come down again when they feel they're working for a kind employer and a kind line manager. It's still going to be a tough time. And I think we've got to be really transparent, people, the need to get people working back again. And I think we've got to try and help people understand that we've all got to live with some degree of risk over the next 12, 18 months, who knows how long. And if we're not going to put ourselves into any risk situation at all, we're not going to be able to lead normal lives at all. We're not going to be able to leave home. We're not going to be able to go into shops. We're not going to be able to get on transport. We're not going to put any kids through school. So I guess it's all about managing our own expectations and understanding of what those levels of risk are. I wish I had a better answer for you, Jill, and happy to take this outside of this webinar. But it's a really tough time coming up. It's a really tough time. And I'll use those two words again. We're going to have to be more empathic, and we're going to have to be more flexible than we've been before. But that doesn't mean that we've still sometimes got quite a strong message to deliver as well, because we have got to get people back, and businesses are going to have to be very much strict in following government guidelines and adhere to the best advice they can about making workplaces as safe as possible. Thank you for that question, Jill. I haven't got all the answers, and hopefully I've just answered it the best that I can. What I was going to say to you all just now, one story I like to tell about looking after your well-being during a tough time is a couple of years ago. I'm generally quite a happy chappy, but I was feeling really sorry for myself one morning. I I was driving, my mum was in hospital with pneumonia, that was it. I was driving to see my mum in hospital, and my dad was dying in a care home from Alzheimer's, and I just cancelled my main summer holiday. And I was virtually tearful, and I rang somebody up because I wanted someone to put a lot of pity on me and feel sorry for me. And I rang this person up, and they surprised me by giving me no pity, but give me a bit of a kick up the backside, and said to me, David, I can see you've got a lot of tough stuff going on at the moment, but you've equally got a lot of good going on in your life. And they said, you know, I know you've got some tough stuff going on, but really try and focus on the good stuff as well. When I first got off the phone to them, I wasn't particularly enamored with that phone call because I was hoping for pity. The reason I tell this story is the following day, I was driving along the same stretch of road. I think I was still going to see my mum in hospital. My dad was still dying of Alzheimer's, and my main holiday was still cancelled. And but I was in a really good place. I was in a really good mood. And I remember thinking, why am I in a good mood today when yesterday I was really down in the dumps? And the reason I was in a good mood is I'd rediscovered gratitude. I'd rediscovered that whole thing about trying to be grateful for what was going on around me. Now, I'm not saying that's the holy grail or the answer to everyone's problems, but some days if you are only a 5 out of 10, it might get you to a 6. If you're only a 6 out of 10, it might get you to a 7. So just, some people keep a gratitude diary. Some people just go through it in their minds, but try, and if you can, and it's not easy, think about all the good things you've got going on in your life. If anyone's got no questions, anyone want to share things you're doing in your work?